Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into political theater, the illusion of change. Let's get started.
For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to recognize the State of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state.
Many of my listeners have probably never heard this statement before, partially because it's Canada and their leader and who really cares what they have to say, and also because it was a very long time ago. It actually dates back about 8 months ago to July 2025. This was the day that Canada announced that in conjunction with the UK, France, and Australia, we're going to officially recognize the state of Palestine. Of course, the preamble to this was that they said there has to be a two-state solution, one that Canada supports. The reason that I play this clip now is just so you understand what Canada and others were looking for. In order to recognize a Palestinian state, which, if you listen to our old podcasts, means nothing, they would require the Palestinian Authority to do a much-needed reform. For many of my listeners, you know that there has not been an election in the area of Palestinian control for 20 years. The Palestinian Authority is in their 20th year of their 4-year term. And despite the fact that they had no intention of actually having an election anytime soon, Canada, UK, France, and Australia decided, you know what, we'll recognize you anyway with the promise that you would eventually reform, that you would eventually have some elections. And believe it or not, as of while I'm speaking, there is finally an election. So maybe they listened. But honestly, don't get your hopes up. This isn't going to be good, especially if you're the UK, Canadian, or Australian governments who demanded that they reform and have an election. As I speak, as we're recording this episode, there is currently, finally, for the first time in a very long time, an election in the Palestinian Arab territories. This would be in Area A and B of the Palestinian Authority territory, and apparently even one very small area in Gaza. This, no doubt, was intended to appease the Western world. The Western world who is demanding that they get out of their old-fashioned corruption and come into a democracy. Except, unfortunately for the Western world, no other countries in the Middle East other than Israel actually has a democracy. So you're kind of expecting them to do something that nobody else does. But that aside, they are, apparently, as of today, having an election. So I guess we should be happy. Maybe we'll see drastic change. Maybe we'll see the Palestinian Arabs have a better government, better leadership, less corrupt, better life, and maybe even, according to the Canadians, a possibility for a two-state solution. Except for the fact that unfortunately, as goes in many of the Arab states, this election is not exactly what you'd think it would be, and it's just political theater. This election that everybody on CNN and the Western world is touting as such a victory is actually not really a full election. It's essentially a municipal election. For municipal towns and cities, it's like mayors and town councils. Funny enough, and not coincidentally, the higher-ups who actually control things are not on the ballot. They're staying in power for their 21st year of their 4-year term. I'm not exactly sure if this is what the Western world who were demanding elections really asked for. This is essentially the people who pick up your garbage. This isn't really going to make a drastic difference in the Palestinian Arab-controlled areas. And what is very interesting about this election, despite it being pretty much useless, is the fact that the candidates are selected by the Palestinian Authority. They're selected by the government. The people in power are deciding who you can and cannot vote for. Under most democracies, that wouldn't exactly count as a democracy. However, to be fair, this is supposed to be in line with what the Canadians had suggested and many others, that Hamas cannot be a part of the future government. So therefore, we do need somebody to decide who is and is not allowed to be a candidate. And even if you're not necessarily Hamas aligned, which there are many, which is why there haven't been elections for so long, the PA knows they are unpopular. According to the reports, the only people who are allowed to run in this election are people who agree with the PLO's two-state solution, which makes sense, but then is this really an election? According to many reports, Hamas, rightfully so, is staying out of the race. And many people who disagree with the PA are not going to run because they don't agree with the PA and their method of dealing with Israel. So anybody who disagrees with the PA is automatically taken off the list. And only people who support the current government get to run. And another very interesting fact about how democratic this is that cities like Ramallah and Nablus are not apparently having elections. These are two major cities in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. But for some reason, they're not actually having elections there. Maybe because they realize they might lose, so we just won't have elections in those areas. These two cities and 42 municipalities will just be acclaimed. They just decide you are in charge now without any votes. In an Al Jazeera article, they quote a local woman as saying, "There is definitely a sense of futility in certain places, and I think it just makes it easier for places to not have an election. They will choose a new group of decision makers, and I believe they will do the same thing according to the old decision makers. We don't see any difference between them, and it's not fair." According to another quote, a 26-year-old pharmacist who lives in Ramallah says that she's simply grown accustomed to elections not happening, and she's not even going to bother to vote. According to her, quote, "We've always lived like this." Keep in mind that according to most recent polls by the Palestinian Arab polling people, they show that over 40% of people in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria would vote for a Hamas candidate. Compare that with the 20% of Palestinian Arabs who said that they would vote for Fatah or the Palestinian Authority. So you have to wonder how many of these people are not getting involved in politics or saying there's no use in voting, because really they would rather be voting for a Hamas member, their preferred candidate who is not allowed to run because he wants to kill Jews and because he's part of Hamas. It really is a shame because the Western media is showing off this amazing thing about an election. But how many do you hear telling the real story about how most cities are not actually having elections at all? And the ones that are given a list of people that the PA, the people currently in charge, have decided are appropriate candidates. I'm not sure if this is what Canada and Australia and others were looking for when they said there needed to be elections and reform. And what is very interesting is that out of the entire Gaza area, only one city in Gaza gets to vote. Now, to be fair, they're blaming it on the war. The war is causing everybody to not be able to vote. Everybody's scattered. Gaza is a mess, which does make sense. But on the other hand, I hate to say, why people are voting in Gaza for the Palestinian Authority approved candidates when Israel's already said as part of the Gaza plan that the Palestinian Authority will have no jurisdiction there. So what they're voting for is beyond me. Over the last few seasons, I've done many episodes about how much the Palestinian Authority is disliked by their own people. Most surveys will show that Hamas is way more powerful when it comes to elections, and this is what got us into this mess in the first place. For those of you who don't know and haven't listened to our old podcast episodes, you'll know that Gaza was taken over by Hamas following an election, where Hamas actually won. Most polls show that the PA will never win elections, which is why they don't have them. And now, it seems like what they're doing is using the situation in Gaza as an excuse to not allow Hamas to run again, and therefore they will always win. As long as they kick out all of the opposing candidates, you're good. As long as the people in charge get to vet all candidates to decide whether or not they're allowed to run based on ideology, then they can pick and choose their winners. So is this really even an election? This is essentially performative to make it appear like they're doing elections just for the West while they keep themselves in charge. And in this backwards world of ours, the world is applauding this. The world is excited about this, thinking there's going to be big changes. Finally, we've recognized Palestine, which essentially means nothing. But finally, they're doing what we've asked them to do and had elections. They're going to create a peaceful two-state solution. Doesn't seem like it. It kind of just seems like more of the same, which is exactly what the people in that Al Jazeera article were saying. But the world continues to pretend that this Palestinian state is going to be a thing, that they're free and fair democratic places, and what does every democracy need? They need a constitution. So it is not a surprise that when Canada, Australia, France, and the UK finally claimed we recognize Palestine, the Palestinian Authority decided they were going to create a constitution. In February 2026, the latest draft of this constitution was released by Mahmoud Abbas, the dictator that was supposed to be elected for 4 years that's been in power for 20. Many of you probably haven't heard about this because no one's talking about it. I'm sure no one wants to know what's in their constitution because it doesn't look good when you're Canada or Australia or the UK demanding equal rights, a democracy fair for all, and even worse, a two-state solution. Because surprise, surprise, this constitution doesn't mention a two-state solution. Just a reminder, all of these governments who recognize the state of Palestine recognized it as a two-state solution. No one said that they wanted to get rid of Israel, just they wanted to establish a Palestinian state. But I guess someone forgot to tell the Palestinians that, because according to their constitution, it claims that Jerusalem is the official capital of the state of Palestine. Just a reminder for all of my non-history buffs, Jerusalem is sovereign Israeli land. They have no control over it. So how is it their capital? Do they think the Canadians and the Australians are just going to hand it over to them? And of course, in the classic Palestinian Arab way, they suggested that there are protections for holy sites in their new capital. Well, just the Christian and the Islamic ones. No mention of the Jewish ones, because surely, in their state, the Jews won't even be allowed. So don't worry about protecting their holy sites. And again, they're not even hiding this. This is written in black and white in the Constitution that the Western world is applauding. And that's not the only blatant, racist, anti-Semitic thing that they have in this Constitution. The irony in the fact that everybody is against the Jewish state because it's an ethno-state and no country should ever be an ethno-state, when another thing in this Constitution says that Islam is the official religion of the country, and it invokes Sharia law as the primary source of legislation. It does in other places feign some sort of freedoms of speech, religion, freedom of assembly, and to protest. However, the first statement says that Sharia law is primary, which means if any of those democratic rules go against Sharia law wins. This is the ethno-state that they claim they don't want, at least when it's the Jewish one, but totally fine when it's their own. Western liberal double standards, am I right? And just to be really nice, they added that there are going to be respects for the rights of Christians. Yes, Christians. No, I didn't forget the word Jewish. It's not in there. We have no rights in their state. And just a reminder, we're not talking simply the Palestinian Authority area, the area today where currently you could be killed if you're an Israeli going into their area, or if you're a Palestinian Arab and you sell land to a Jew, you get the death penalty. These laws that already exist now. But we're not talking about that area. They want Jerusalem, and for Jews to have zero rights there. Welcome to the democracy of the state of Palestine, brought to you in part by Canada, UK, Australia, and France. And that lack of protection for Jews isn't simply in the wording where they're not mentioning Jews. They actively support terrorism against Jews. According to Article 24 of the draft constitution, the Palestinian Authority says it will, quote, work to provide protections and care to the families of martyrs and the wounded and prisoners, and then this is reiterated in Article 44. So on the one hand, they say there's protection from all violence for all people of their country, but also says that they will pay the people who harm Jews. Let me just remind you that this pay-for-slay policy was supposed to be abolished. They were no longer going to support terrorism. But here we are in their new constitution saying that they will pay for slay. But I guess that won't be much of an issue since apparently they're just going to kick out or kill all of the Jews once the country starts. So therefore, there probably won't be a lot of terrorism. One of the most funny and interesting parts of them outing themselves in their constitution is in Article 1, the first thing they wrote, which is that Palestine is part of the larger Arab world, and the Palestinian people are part of an Arab nation. What's interesting is that we were told for generations that Palestinians are indeed very different than all the other Arabs. But apparently the establishment of a Palestinian state is just yet another Arab state. It is not necessarily unique. They're all part of one Arab nation. What happened to self-determination? Their literal first article is that we are just Arabs like everybody else, and we want to join the other Arab states and be just like them. I could go on and on about all of the issues with this supposed constitution. I don't know what's going to happen. I guess they can technically do it, even with the UK and Canada all against it. I guess technically they can make whatever constitution they want. Maybe that's why it's a very stupid idea to recognize a state before you even look at their constitution to find out whether or not it's anti-Semitic, genocidal, or even promoting the two-state solution that you claim you support. Probably should have looked at this first before officially recognizing the state, and now it's too late. But what is becoming so clear is the fact that the Palestinian Arabs don't want democracy. They don't want a two-state solution. They don't want anything that the West is asking them to do. So at this point, they're just pretending. They do fake elections to make it seem like something's changing. They make a constitution that appears to be Western-facing, while essentially being the same as every other Arab dictator. Nothing is really changing, just like the voters in the Palestinian areas already said. In the end, I don't really know what's going to happen here, since Palestine is probably never going to be an actual state, since they don't seem to really want one. The only state that they want is the entire thing, making it Jew-free. This constitution and these fake elections are just playing a game, something for the news media in the West, something to help out the Western useful idiots, the ones who are recognizing a state, but only if you reform them. This is just for show. It could not be more clear in the way that they make their elections, or the way that they put together their constitution, that they have no interest in actually having a democracy, in having two states even. They want the entire thing. Right now, they are simply doing an illusion of change, without actually changing anything. Because all of this, in the end, is just political theater. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.